Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, apologies for I had my usual problem getting into these meetings during the quality conference and at the end. So it's nice to have 14 of you here. I guess, firstly, I look at most of the names here and I see quite a lot of very familiar names, which is really wonderful. So I'd like to welcome all of you very, very warmly. Really, the idea of the session after the one that we had previously with Felicia Mariani is really to give you all an opportunity, I guess, to share the work that you're doing in the area of tourism risk, crisis, and recovery. I'm going to use my sort of my rights as chairman maybe to kick off something, to tell you something that I've been working on, and then I'd really like to open it up for you to talk about perhaps the work that you're doing, because really one of the important things about us, the special interest group, particularly in the area of tourism risk, crisis and recovery, is really to be able to share our resources so that we can actually provide research to our universities, to our wider communities, and particularly to the tourism and hospitality industry and events industry, which will be very helpful. So I'm going to just do a little something here, which, okay, had this before, okay, let's have a look. There's my documents. I actually had this all up and running before, but never mind. Okay. Screen sharing is paused. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, can you, stop share, yes, pause. Okay, it might help if I try that one more time. There we go. Can everybody see that?
David, all we can see is a white screen.
Oh, okay, well, that's not very helpful, is it? Okay, well, we'll sort that out in just 1 second. Sorry about it. Thanks, Brett, for letting me know. Yeah. Okay. Stop share. And okay, can everybody see that?
No, you need to share your screen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do that actually. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's not coming through. I've done it. Okay, let's have a look here. Would probably be helpful if I actually put it on the whiteboard. Sorry. Okay, is that visible now?
It's still just a white screen.
It's still just a white screen.
But David, it's bigger. It is a bigger white screen.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's get back there. I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to share it again. And yes, I think this time, got it now?
Yeah, that worked. We can see
excellent. Okay, this is going to be the shortest presentation you've ever seen, because as I said, this is really an idea about sharing things rather than hogging the outline. So, okay. I wanted to just give you a quick preview. I've just in December I actually completed the manuscript of the book with this title, Tourism Risk, Crisis and Recovery, a Thematic Approach. For those of you who know your tourism risk management literature, and Brett knows it better than practically anybody that I know, but there's a few others who are very familiar with it. One of the best books that was ever written in the thematic area was Joan Henderson's book, Crises, Tourism Crises, Causes and Consequences. So I actually used that book as a model for what I've tried to cover in this. This has been written as a research-based textbook. It's pitched, I guess, at students who want a basic knowledge of the various themes in tourism risk, crisis and recovery. What Stage actually approached me to write this a couple of years ago. Thank God I was late, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to include coronavirus, which has been the biggest game changer crisis that we've ever had. So just in a nutshell, without blabbing on about everything that's in here, the book's written in two parts. So obviously a preface setting the context for risk, crisis, recovery and resilience, which is mainly a theoretical approach to the problem. I've also done, the second chapter looks at government and travel industry approaches to recovery. So I looked at what governments have done. I also divided the travel industry into its various sectors to identify what are the key risks that apply to whether it's aviation, whether it's cruising, whether it's accommodation, etc. The biggest chapter in the book, again, which will hardly shock or surprise you, was the chapter I've done on COVID-19 or coronavirus. The reason that's such an important chapter, as you know, is that in addition to all the things that we're well aware of about the border shutdowns, social distancing, etc., it's been probably the greatest paradigm shifter and disruptor to the tourism industry that we've ever seen. And it's really interesting, in the Corthy conference, a lot of scholars, a lot of our colleagues were giving some really terrific papers about different aspects of the impact of COVID-19. I'm glad in a way that very few of them looked at the major paradigms. So just to mention two of them, about 25 that I actually put in there. One of the classic paradigms that we had about tourism until coronavirus was that tourism was becoming more democratic. It was becoming available to more people. COVID-19 has basically knocked that paradigm very much on the head. We've also found too that a lot of the concerns that we had pre-COVID, concerns about over-tourism, have certainly gone through some incredible changes. So what it was, I guess, if you wanted to look at it, to use one word, we talked about Airbnb as a disruptor. We've talked about Uber as the disruptor. Well, COVID-19 has been probably the ultimate disruptor. The other key issue too, of course, has been, unlike any other crises tourism crisis we've had to deal with before, this is a crisis which is dominated by government regulation. Whether we're talking about state governments in Australia, federal government, or whether we're talking about the World Health Organization or governments around the world. Regulation has really driven this particular crisis. So that's a huge chapter that finished up being around about 15,000 words, and I probably could have banged on for a lot longer. Chapter 4, I then start to look at the other themes. So I treated coronavirus as really a theme in itself, because it's more than a theme. It's been a game changer. My other themes were things that I think we're usually fairly familiar with in the risk and crisis management, tourism risk and crisis management literature. I've covered political instability, terrorism, natural disasters, medically based crises. In other words, anything that was a pandemic before COVID-19. I've looked at crime, economic crises or challenges, technological risks and crises, recovery from internal management failure, and environmental crises, including the issue of global warming. So the idea of this is to be a guide for the perplexed, whether those perplexed are students or whether the perplexed are scholars or whether the perplexed are travel industry leaders. Because as I said, since Joan's book in 2007, there's been an awful lot of things that have happened in the tourism industry. Her book was absolutely brilliant. I've got I've got nothing but praise for it, but it certainly needed an update. So that's I guess my news. The book itself is due to be coming out in September. In fact, I'm sending the final versions of the manuscript after this meeting, as a matter of fact, back to Sage. So everything is kind of ready to go. So anyway, that's me. I'll get out of screen sharing, and I guess there we are. What I would like to invite all of us to do, I guess, let's have a gallery view. Oh, that's much better. Is to invite any of you to perhaps share some of the work that you're doing. I mean, we saw an excellent presentation, of course, that Joe gave not too long ago, but it's probably a good opportunity to share. So, Joe, you had a pretty fair run, but but maybe Effie, are you involved in doing some research at the moment?
Yeah, I did a working paper and I looked at the COVID impact on event industry at a small scale. So I interviewed business operators, and what I found was that not all of them changed their business model. Some decided to just to stop and wait and see whether the government will offer any grants, and then some decided to actually diversify their model so they can survive. So basically there's two line of thoughts happening, and so that was just some preliminary results, and the research is continuing. That's interesting.
Okay, fantastic. Monique.
Yes.
Yes, please. Because we're a nice, small, intimate group here, so it's hopefully if you're.
Monique's the forum moderator, so she's not the researcher.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Van Nguyen.
Maybe an idea to put cameras on.
Yeah. Van, have you? Oh, okay. Oh, there's Gabriel.
Hi, Kathy. We met on Thursday.
Hi. So, Gabriel, do you want to share what you've been up to in the area of tourism risk, crisis, and recovery? Oh, there's Brent.
If I was to be sharing, I would. I was helping Jo with the project that she presented today.
Oh,
so
okay.
I was the project manager on that. I can talk for hours about it, but I think she summarised it pretty well.
She summarised it extremely well.
Gabby did most of the work.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a really interesting piece of research. I mean, some of those figures that you came out with in your research were absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
Particularly in terms of the impact and the dependence on JobKeeper. I mean, they're not necessarily surprising, but they were still higher than I would have thought they might have been. I can understand for travel agents, having been one, you know, if you're a travel agent and you haven't learnt how to sell domestic, well, your business is kaput and you really need JobKeeper very badly.
Yeah.
Brent, you're one of the leading lights of tourism research in the field of risk, crisis. So what have you been up to lately, if I may ask? Oh, you're mute.
I've been reviewing other people's papers, David, or sending them out for review, you know, through the Journals of Tourism Research as associate editor. So I've seen
yes, of course you are. Yeah,
seeing all this great work being produced, and I'm not really doing too much of it myself. Although I must admit, I've got a couple of papers that have been published recently.
Yeah.
one in tourism management, one in annals, but mainly from the consumer perceptions or the consumer response point of view. I haven't really done anything on the business side or the industry side, but on consumer perceptions.
Because you're one of the people. Read any book on tourism risk, crisis, and recovery, and Brent Ritchie is there to be cited at every point. I might actually just also add, this is something which has been done by another Queenslander, who, Brent, you'll probably know. Jeff Wilkes, who used to be the head of the Centre for Disaster Management at the University of Queensland, is still actively writing, and he's coming up with a book which is being released probably in March of this year. His book is called Tourism, Health, Safety and Wellbeing in the New Normal. He's writing it with his wife, Donna Pendergast, and a couple of other well-known Cauthy scholars, Peter Leggett and Damien Morgan. So they're the editors. And there are chapters, I know about this book because I've got one chapter in it about travel advisories, but there's travel medicine and tourism health, infectious diseases and travel, pre and post medical consultations, vulnerable groups and health consideration, terrorism and security for tourists, written by a guy based in Victoria called Tony Ridley, who is one of the leading industry experts actually on terrorism and tourism. He's a former member of the SAS, and if you ever meet Tony, you'll immediately see why. You've met him, Brent. He's a very big fellow. Looks like a former SAS person. There's food safety and hygiene, tourism safety and natural disaster management. David King and Jette Gertner, who I think is a frequent supporter of this, is there. Richard Aquino. So there's quite a few people who are there. So this is an upcoming book. It'll be published by Springer, based out of New York. So just to let you know that that's something that's coming out very, very soon, probably quite good for the bookshelves. A lot of emphasis, obviously, on health matters, and partly the reason for that is that Jeff Wilkes, as well as being a professor in tourism, was also a qualified doctor as well. He's a very multi-talented guy, Jeff. Sarah, did you want to cover anything that you've been involved in this area or that you're planning to do?
I've just done a contract commercially for the World Bank on risk recovery post-COVID for the Pacific Island states. So that was the 11 countries in the Pacific Islands. So it was more to do with the most vulnerable. So who was going to be, was feeling the impacts from the coronavirus the most. And
it's an interesting, sorry, I was just going to say it's an interesting question, especially because this is the part of the world that's had the fewest cases of COVID-19. I mean, really, the Southwest Pacific. Yes.
Yeah, so no, those issues are more to do with, for instance, that the Pacific's very highly reliant on remittances, and all the for basic government services, and they had high levels of disease, which we also have in our Indigenous communities in Australia, and a lot of the remittances that were putting the health services in place for malaria and all those sorts of things were diminishing. So there was there was a lot of women that were really impacted because they were, the major employees within the tourism industry, and they were also the carers, seen traditionally, especially in Melanesian societies, as the caregiver, the providers. There was a lot of stuff on violence as well that came out. So what was really important with those, so the World Bank had to pull out all of its programs because they simply could not be delivered under a COVID state. So it was about reshaping those programs and looking at making sure, because the business it has an economic slant on how to get different hubs of activity happening to get skills. That's why I kept on asking about skills. You know, there needs to be a mechanism in place to get those skills up, so more Solomon Islanders or whatever can participate in the tourism industry when it gets back up again, you know, when the borders open up and the planes, like for instance, the Solomon's got a new plane the other day and so forth with remittance money rather than in other industries. And the other thing that was really important was bringing together the communication between the stakeholders, because there was a lot of investment and everyone, you know, during COVID wanted to do something good, something effective, build better, all those sorts of things. But they weren't talking to each other on how to maximise those values. And also it was the same stakeholder groups that were talking to people, and they were just bombarded by all of these donors coming in. And it was about, you know, harmonising that donor environment, harmonising the government saying, you know, and also the communication. So when COVID when all the money started kicking off, there was, you know, very clear communication avenues. There were very clear expectations that were owned by local people. So I've recently just done a survey on the Solomon Islands as a part of my research. So my research is on pro-port tourism in the on whether it's an effective tool for poverty alleviation or not. So I've just done a survey within the Solomon Islands about what their issues are with tourism, and also, you know, what their visions are, what they would like to see over there, and what's working, what's not. I used a realist framework. I was trying to be as positive as possible. So I used that, but what was coming a lot out of that was the COVID. You know, there was a lot of feeling around helplessness about, you know, being fragmented, moving around because they can't afford to live where they live anymore because of they have to go back to their islands. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of infrastructure shortages and so forth. So there was a lot of, so what's coming out of that now is that they're sort of taking it back into their governments now and saying we need, you know, we need more training. Like the Solomon Islands National University has huge gaps in crisis management, risk recovery, and it's not in their natural disaster risk management plans, which guide nationally around all the Pacific Island countries.
And
yeah, I've been just doing stuff.
No, I was just going to say, interestingly, Sarah, the tourism ministry of the Solomon Islands actually is quite advanced in that area. I remember dealing with a guy called Michael Takura, who was the head of the Solomon Islands tourism, and they were really keen on developing risk and crisis management protocols actually in the tourism sector, especially I guess because so much of the tourism was dive tourism, which is inherently fairly risky anyway. Yes.
And also they normally get a cyclone through every year too. So a lot of their buildings are made out of, you know, they suffer a lot from climate change as well. It's a really big issue there. And for instance, the Kava Bar got knocked off in Honiara the other day because it's twice each year, you know, so they've got to rebuild that. And you find that when they do rebuild, it's mainly the multinationals and the foreigners that can afford to rebuild, and it's not local people. So it actually is impacting that division between rich and poor, you know. So, yeah, anyway, that's all very interesting. So that's what I've been doing.
Oh, sounds pretty interesting.
It'd be good to see a vulnerable thing in your book there as well, David. I thought, oh, that's interesting, but there's nothing about vulnerability, vulnerable people and women in employment and all those sorts of things.
Okay.
Does that come out in theme? Is that a thematic area? Is that a thematic area that binds through the whole lot?
Well, I think it does to a certain extent. I mean, look, one thing that I have pointed out, which is very obvious, there are a lot of societies which are very economically very heavily dependent on tourism, and one thing that certainly is through is that developing countries have a higher propensity to be dependent on tourism for their economies than developed countries. And interesting, you talk about the Solomon Islands, but just to the south, Vanuatu is probably, its economy is nearly 40% dependent on tourism. Fiji is over 40% based on reliant on tourism. So the Solomon Islands a lot less so, but still
they're only 5%.
Yeah,
5% of GDP.
It's still, but trying to replace that, particularly now that's been pretty much off the books for now the last year, because Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji in particular, 80 to 90% dependent on Australian and New Zealand tourism. That's where they get their tourism from. The rest of it is
and German, Japan, and China. But one other thing on it is that what sort of seems to be coming out of the lessons learned is that tourism is just one of many things. You know, so it's it's probably like 20% of survival. So it needs to interlink with all the other industries too, like fishing and so forth in the Solomon Islands. So yeah, it's you've got to sort of think, because it's so a limited economy, you've got to sort of think really on how it all, the big picture all works together in order to make it sustainable. So yeah, anyway.
Thank you for that. I'm just conscious of sort of trying to get around the chessboard here.
No, get around the room. Yeah, sorry.
So I'm just trying to think here. Is Van there?
Sarah, just before you go, David, Sarah, can you just put a message in the chat? Can you let me know what you're doing? Because I'm meeting the Consul General of the Solomon Islands on Friday on behalf
there
of
you are, that's good.
I would love to talk about your research, even though you're not at UQ, but I'd like to mention it. So drop me an email or something, will you?
Are you going over, Brent? Can you get a ticket?
No, the Consul General's coming to UQ. So I think he's a Consul General for Australia. So he must have been appointed, and he's here, and he's visiting UQ on Friday. He's visiting.
What's his name?
Kariti Sangha.
I've never heard of him before. Yeah, sure. I'm just doing I'm actually, do you want me to just send you something, Brent?
A couple of bullet points about what you've been doing. Be great.
Do you want me to send you my preliminary discussion paper? No, I don't want to share it.
Do the Donald Trump summary. The Donald Trump summary.
Confidential.
Just a one pager. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
It's confidential.
I'll just mention your name.
Strictly confidential.
I'll just mention your name and say you've been doing some work around tourism. But anyway, let's move on, David. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay, no, that's all right. I just wondered if you wanted to share any of your research at all, or any of your activity. No. Okay, we might move on. Hiroki Sano.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Would you like to tell us a bit about what you're researching at the moment, or what you're interested, what areas of interest that you have in the risk, crisis, and recovery world?
Actually, recently I'm not doing research around risk recovery or something.
Okay.
Actually, I'm doing research on mobility patterns of tourists.
Sorry, mobility was it?
Mobility patterns of international tourists who visited Osaka city in Japan. This research was done based on data collected while people used the tourism app. And I'm doing this kind of research for the purpose of improving over-tourism problem, but recently we don't see so much over-tourism problem.
Yeah,
so,
I didn't think you were right now.
Yeah, we are concerned about how to progress our research based on this current research. And also, we are interested in how our current research about people's movements or efficient transportation system based on our data analysis, and also how this research about transportation system can be connected to risk management problem.
So interesting that you say you're not dealing with risk, but some of the areas that you're dealing with actually are full of the risk, you know, particularly, I mean, it's interesting in Japan because Japan, I think it could be said is one of the most risk averse countries in the world. I've always been a great admirer of just how effective Japan has been, particularly in its transport area, to minimize risk and to maintain those Shinkansens and all the other transport systems that work so well in Japan. I guess one question, I know it doesn't really apply to Osaka, but maybe you might have an insight on this one. What's your sense of Japan's ability, preparedness to host the Olympic Games, and would that have an effect on cities that are outside of Tokyo, like Osaka?
I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical about Japan's ability to hold the Olympic Games during this difficult period.
Well, so are 84% of Japanese, so there you're in good company.
I don't know, but I believe it's a good time to conduct risk management research in terms of companies or government's decision-making process in Japan. But actually, I don't know. Well, recently, things are changing daily or monthly, so I'm actually not sure what's the right things during this uncertain time.
Yeah, because it was very interesting. I mean, the Japanese government had a lot of expectation that hosting the Olympics was going to be a massive generator for tourism, and of course, coronavirus is like it's done with a lot of other expectations, has knocked that very, very harshly on the head. So I'm just, I guess, is it a matter, for example, from the Japanese government's point of view or Japanese Olympic Committee's point of view, that hosting it is now a matter of keeping face?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have much. I have nothing to say.
Okay.
About the Olympics. Sorry.
No, that's fair enough. But
yeah.
But it's interesting that I guess when you first started your research, you were dealing with the problem of over tourism, and now perhaps, you know, the coronavirus again has affected that scenario as well. Is the loss of international tourism, because I know last year nearly 40 million people, in 2019 nearly 40 million people visited Japan, and obviously a lot of them would have visited Osaka. Is domestic tourism in Japan actually taking up the difference to any great extent?
Yeah, I think so. I think now people in Japan, several people in Japan are enjoying domestic tourism because major tourist cities or tourism cities or areas are less crowded, and several service companies are providing different types of services for local people, I think.
Yeah, no, it's very good. Well, look, thank you for sharing that. I'm just thinking we better move along. Andre Kwok.
Yes.
Hi,
thank you.
Andre. Do you want to put your camera on so we can see what a handsome fellow you are?
Oh, sure. Give me a moment because
Okay, you got the. So, no, we've got you there. We don't seem to have any sound coming from there. Okay. Well, while we're trying to figure out, oh, there you are. Okay.
Oh yes. Hello.
Hi,
Sorry, I
Andre.
was with the camera off just now.
No, that's okay. So, what sort of work are you up to at the moment? What sort of research in the risk, crisis, and recovery field are you into?
This crisis, I am doing on a working paper, which I just presented early last week. On the it is a systematic lead review on the content analysis of all the.
I remember hearing you. Yes, I tuned into your
Yes.
paper. It was very good.
So it's a very preliminary study, and I'd like to build upon it later, because I only managed to focus on the first 6 months, and then it took a while for me to do all the analysis. So I would prefer to develop it further, perhaps wait another 1 year cycle or another 2 years to do another round of lead review on that. So
Well, there's been a lot of literature coming out over the last couple
and
of
it will be much clearer, and we can see more themes in it. Yeah, because this situation is very fluid and very dynamic. And even though this first 6 months give us some indication, but now with all the research coming in now, with better understanding, I think we should carry it forward.
Yeah, well, keeping up with literature, the literature in the field is actually really important because there's been an explosion of it lately. I know some of our members here have been contributing to that. We've got a special edition of the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management, and we got about 60 odd papers sent into that. So there's still a couple of slow reviewers that are holding up the works, but everything else. But yeah, there's a lot of work, and understandably so. And what was really interesting, when we had the journal editors session here at the Corthy conferences, many of them are saying that if a paper doesn't in one way or another refer to coronavirus, it's probably not particularly relevant. So, and we've had that from people like Sarah Dolsonar and others who are top. So thank you for that. That's really interesting.
Another paper I recently published on is part of the COVID-19. I was looking at the potential of virtual and augmented reality as a means to help tourism companies to survive.
Oh, that's it. That's interesting. So what is it? Augmented reality?
Augmented, yes.
Oh, okay.
Because, so we have industry putting some of that into practice during the peak of the lockdown, and we have seen some effects on how it helps domestic tourism to have a greater reach beyond geographical borders. So I'd like to expand on that as well, to understand further how it can help enterprises to overcome the restrictions.
Well, that's very good because that's a wonderful innovation, obviously, in tourism, and I think we're going to see an awful lot more of this type of innovation in virtual reality tourism and a lot of other things. So no, it's great, interesting topic. I just think
thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for sharing that. It's really great, and sounds like wonderful research that you're doing. Hongbo. Have we got Hongbo there? Would you like to share anything with us? No, he's been very quiet. I know one person who isn't shy. That's Marcella Fang. Because Marcella, have you got some research you want to share with us?
Hi everyone. I'm actually not in the risk or this space that you are in. It's always interesting to know what's happening in that space. Actually, what I'm doing is more of leadership development. So leadership is my space.
Well, that's a pretty important part of risk management.
Sure. Yeah, there is a connectivity. So pretty much I'll try to perhaps see what you do as the bigger picture, and then looking at the industry or the destinations context, seeing what the gaps are from the skills perspective, and building programs, courses, workshops, whatever that will help people to develop themselves and other skills to get the needed skill sets or behaviors to do what they need to do in the industry.
Marcella, can I just ask you a question, because it's really interesting. I mean, we've seen many different leadership styles in dealing with coronavirus. We've seen the Daniel Andrews version of leadership style. We've seen the Anastasia Palaszczuk style of leadership. We've seen the Western Australian Mark McGowan version. We've seen the Gladys Berejiklian version, which has been, you know, to try and develop business as usual. I guess if you were to look at what would be some of the qualities that you would see as appropriate leadership style for dealing with this particular challenge?
Well, you really have to start with the people. What do actual people like us want to see, and what sort of attributes, characteristics, what sort of communication we like to have also. So we want to be part of, we want to be included. We want someone who understands the bigger picture, also is able to give the direction and sort of help to plan the pathway to the future, right? So communication is always a big part of this.
Yeah.
The direction, the purpose is massive. Without it, like, you know, how else would you take people where it's sort of they need to go? Because like Felicia, when she was talking about her earlier communications, I mean, the industry is confused. You really need to interpret things for them. So you need the Northern Star. So it's very, very tricky. And especially at this time, because the well-being, you know, the issues are rising, and that's not helping understanding and also getting clarity of what needs to be done. So there is a lot that consumes the energy within the brain, and you really need some people who provide that sort of guidance. So positivity, sort of more supportive type of style, nothing the type like the Donald Trump. I mean, that will never work really. But again, in different countries, different things work a little differently. But what we see in Australia, New Zealand, more, you know, we need to be tough sometimes, like what we have in Victoria. But, you know, on the other hand, you also need to be supportive and encouraging.
But I think also too, one of the criticisms that often comes up about Daniel Daniel, I always refer to him as Dopey Dan. I probably shouldn't do that. But anyway, is that he never takes personal responsibility for anything. You know, he talks about what needs to be done, what has to be done. Everybody's responsible for the problems except for me, the Premier. And that does great with a lot of people, I think, in Victoria. But
probably, David, a lot of people would disagree with you on that point as well.
I'm sure
people will always be on either end, really. There are pros and cons, and it's really hard to go into. I don't think we should even touch this.
Yeah.
And Marcella, very rightly, just wanted to add to building from what Joanne said in the previous meeting, to collaborate, and what Felicia said, collaborate with the competition. So I guess leaders who are open-minded and don't have the fear of reaching out to the competitors to collaborate. So stop seeing them as competitors and seeing them as collaborators instead. And I think you and I have had that discussion before, Marcella.
Yeah, that's right. So I did write a few articles on the collaborative leadership, and I think definitely that's a way forward for the tourism industry. The thing is that not many people in the industry know what collaborative leadership looks like, what this involves, and also the processes, the mechanisms. You know, again, you need to give the guidance, you need to involve people, you need to make things happen. People wouldn't come just because, you know, they are desperate or they really want to. You kind of need to invite them and that sort of stuff. So it's complex. It's very tricky. But I agree, collaboration is huge and it must happen.
Interestingly enough, if you can sometimes use some really fantastic case studies. I actually teach a whole session on leadership in one of my risk management subjects here at UTS. And one of the examples that I actually pull out is former Queensland Premier Anna Bligh, whose leadership during the Queensland floods was quite extraordinary and very embracing and also very collaborative and very empathetic, which I think is also important during these very, very difficult times. You can point out, I guess, countless of many examples of really good leadership, but sometimes that role model tends to work. And the interesting thing is that Anna Bligh was not always a popular Premier of Queensland. I think that many people would say that. But at that particular time, at a time of crisis, she really shone. It was a little bit like Winston Churchill, governed the UK during the war, did a fantastic job during the war. As soon as the war was finished, he was booted out by the electorate. So sometimes, you know, you have people who are crisis or risk leaders.
Yeah, and you will actually often see that many people that you wouldn't see as leaders, they will actually emerge during the crisis situations. They will actually do it for the sake of being human. So you will find the connectivity is much stronger as well. But I think it's also important not to just look at the political leaders and the big people in the space, or
couldn't agree more.
Because it really, leadership is for everyone, even for the front line. So I strongly believe that we really need to build the skills even at the universities, because it starts with the self. And I find that there are so many gaps and challenges at the self level where people don't understand themselves. They don't know who they are, what drives them, and that sort of stuff. And without that understanding, you can't really stand up and be a stronger leader. So there is so much of opportunity out there.
But what you say is so true, Marcella, because also too we've lionised, for example, the firefighters during the bushfires here. That certainly wasn't politicians that got the kudos. Emergency services people have been greatly recognised, and through a whole lot of different areas. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It certainly doesn't have to be a politician to be a leader.
Can I just add, in our research, in small destinations, local leadership was really, really important, and was the difference between one small town thriving or surviving and another just disappearing. And often that was driven by women, which is really good to or groups of women who were accessing government resources and bringing people together, and just accessing the opportunities that were they could find. Yeah.
Yeah,
but
that's
really
great. Interesting to see what's happening. Yeah, excellent. And from the destination context, you know, it will always be a case of destination. There's nothing like you will find two same destinations, just because of the community, the people within, the people who stand up, the connectedness, and how strong the network actually becomes over the years. So I think, yeah, I don't know if we could put more light on that leadership network at destinations and help other destinations to learn from each other.
Well, interestingly enough, your research interest has got more relevance to risk, crisis and recovery than you probably ever thought. So.
I know there is that connectivity, but it's not really the lens that I'll look through, but definitely, yeah, I mean, there are opportunities always. And yeah, I mean, developing courses or sessions for even the industry here and there in different destinations, I know that will benefit many, but yeah.
No, that's great. I'm just looking to see if anybody else that I've missed out on. Michelle Thompson. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to tell us? Oh, there you are.
Hi, David. Hi, Effie. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was just hiding away a little bit during this meeting.
That's all right.
Working at home. But yeah, I haven't got anything I'm working on in the crisis management space at the moment, but I can see how a project I'm working on with Bruce Prideaux, looking at drive tourism in regional areas, is going to be interesting to see how the impacts of COVID-19 are going to roll out through some of the results. So looking at some of the workforce issues and visitation patterns and what that means in regional areas. So I think I'm really interested to have a look at Jo's work that she presented earlier, and having a look at what that means for regional areas, particularly in the light of, you know, post-crisis and so on. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Interestingly enough, I actually live in country New South Wales, and we've actually found that when borders were closed, whether it was the Queensland border or the Victorian border or the South Australian border, regional visitation in regional New South Wales has gone through the roof. It's the one shining star of tourism during the coronavirus era, because it's actually forced Australians, and I think the same has happened in in states in Queensland as well too, where people have been forced to actually explore their own backyards. This is one thing that this crisis has done, because we can't travel internationally. We're sometimes very limited in travelling interstate. So interstate tourism has actually been a growth area. So which particular regions are you looking at there?
We're looking at the Atherton Tablelands first.
Oh, okay. In your backyard of Cairns, yeah.
In the backyard of Cairns, because I'm Queensland based.
Yeah.
And further south. So looking at some of the economic and social perspectives around the drive tourism market. So picking up on that north-south corridor, you know, down to the southeast corner is going to be interesting in there. And then, yeah, thinking about too what it means for the communities, but other related industries like agriculture that's also been impacted. But it's funny you say that domestic tourism's I guess, or for regional areas has had positive outcomes. It's always nice to talk about positive stories, because I was working with one group last year running some agritourism workshops, and I was going to go down to the Greater Whitsunday region and present these, but then COVID happened. So they all went to online. But their farmers market down there has just grown in a matter of weeks, was going gangbusters, because people are looking, as you said, to their own backyard. So it also brings to the fore not just visiting local areas and, you know, intrastate even, but also thinking about other aspects of life too, and, you know, food security issues and those sorts of things. So it was fascinating to see. So I'm keen to get down that way and continue that research. So as you said before, it's all interlinked. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of the next 12, 24 months time.
I mean, I guess Cairns itself, and you know better than any of us, must be really hurting, because there's always been a strong dependence of Cairns on both international and interstate tourism. But I guess outside of Cairns, because Cairns is now such a big city, that it's actually now a big feeder area for a lot of what we might call local drive tourism.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you can use that spoke, you know, model to head up to the Tablelands or to Port for a day and so on. So yeah, Cairns is hurting at the moment. So we haven't quite started the interviews so far yet for the Drive Tourism project, but it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, what happens in those more regional communities and what the perspectives are in comparison. So yeah, the JobKeeper discussion's one to keep an eye on too, particularly for up here, because of the really high majority of businesses that were relying on JobKeeper payments.
Well, it's a little bit different in New South Wales, because New South Wales has a population of over 8 million people, and many of those 8 million people traditionally would travel internationally or interstate and couldn't. So all of those people who have diverted into sort of visiting the regions, my little town is near Tamworth. We have had record visitation simply because people thought, well, where the hell haven't I been? And you know, our little town of Nundle kind of topped up the list. But it's been interesting. Even areas, for example, in far western New South Wales, like Broken Hill, Tibooburra, places that people would not normally visit, they've also been experiencing a tourism boom, because it's still within borders and it's still, I guess, interesting enough for people to visit. And certainly up in the Atherton Tablelands, well, you've got plenty of fantastic places to visit there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of this research, and how that domestic market, I guess, has changed to a degree, but also what the opportunities are there for Cairns and the wider region moving forward into the next 12 months. So we'll pick up on some other work there out of our visitor study that we do up here locally too. So.
Oh, that sounds really fascinating. Folks, I just realised it's about a minute to 3. Can I just thank everybody for being involved in this discussion? I'm actually quite pleased that, you know, after a week of coffee, that some of you are actually able to make it here, which has been really great, because it was a very intensive week, and I'm sure you're all preparing for, as I am, to get things moving for the semester and all the other things that the millions that our universities are calling us to do. But can I just thank all of you for being here, and if I've missed out on a couple of people who weren't able to share their research, I apologise for that. Do keep in mind that we do have a site on LinkedIn which you're welcome to join into. We'll also try and keep you posted on some of the activities that the SIG is about to embark on. Also, too, I'd like to thank Jo Fountain. Jo Fountain is our co-chair. Of course, she's at Lincoln University, New Zealand. She couldn't make it today, but she's done a fantastic job for the SIG, and it's been a very nice way to finish it. It's really interesting that so many of you are doing research that might not necessarily be directly related to risk, crisis and recovery, but it still has a connection. So look, thank you very much. I think we might close off the meeting at this point. Effie, thank you very much for helping to get this together. And Jo,
It's a pleasure.
and Jo, thank you very much for your terrific presentation in the earlier session. It was really good. Okay.
Thanks, David. Awesome. Thank you very much.
All the best.